Okay, let's get started. Just before we begin, two things. Can everybody see this little mouse highlight that appears on my screen here? This is just important. I want to make sure that everyone can see that. Okay, awesome. That helps with clarity, especially for people who have a hard time seeing the mouse. So always good to have that. Okay, let's close this guy. Sweet. I hope you're having a good day. Yeah, so welcome to the workshop today. One of our community workshop that's sort of focusing basically on three things. So what we're going to talk about today is we're going to talk about how to make spotlighting adjustments to an images. So I consider the adding of exposure in selective ways to be a really good foundational adjustment to making an image better. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take that strategy and we're going to apply it to skies. And the reason why I want to focus on skies is because a common question I get that comes up in workshops is, how do I fix this sky that has detail but is like a bit overly washed out? Or a bit overexposed, but still to the extent that we can see detail. In essence, what we're talking about is skies that aren't ideal or lack a bit of, lack a bit of vibrance to them, or lack a bit of sort of a pop. And so we're going to be focusing on utilizing those sort of spot adjustment tools that we've sort of foundationally worked on with light, and then sort of treat those and apply them to skies in our image. And then the third thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about presets. And the reason why is because if we create a sky adjustment that we like, that focuses on really bringing out the detail in the sky that wasn't present there, what we can do is we can actually make a preset of that, and then we can apply it to other images that roughly have the same skyline as that. So yeah, this is just going to be focusing on those three different elements. I noticed, so an anonymous attendee asked, can you cover a bit on image well, if possible? So two things, if there's any unrelated stuff to the topic that we're covering today, what we can do is we can cover it at the end, or what you can do is you can email me, and then I can get back to you in an email with more information on an unrelated question as to the topic of the workshop. But if we have time, I'd love to cover that at the end, and maybe anonymous, if you stick around to the end, if you can divulge more on what you mean by image well, just give me a bit more information on your question, and we can sort that out at the very end. So appreciate that. Unrelated questions will be taken at the end. Related questions, I'll try to do my best to take them as we go. How many of you are new to workshops? How many of you have participated in one before? So new, or I guess previously you've experienced one. Done a few. Sweet. Oh yeah, there's some names I recognize for sure. Ali, nice to have you back. Dean, 3 before, awesome. Barbara and most. Christoph, excellent. Robert. Okay, so frequent flyer. Okay, Alex, I recognize your name as well. Sven, okay, cool. Okay, sweet. Yeah, so it ranges, it looks like. But most of you have seen some before, and that makes sense because this is popped up in our community page, and our community page being brand new and sort of our main flagship area where we're producing all of our content from now on. It makes sense that most of you have already seen some workshops. So new thing about workshops that's really important and also kind of exciting as well to talk about is so we have 3 people doing workshops now. It's not just me. It's also Alec Watson and then my coworker Rodrigo. And so what's cool about this is we're going to be offering workshops on 3 different variations in content. So Rodrigo will be focusing on Luxia, which is our video editor product, because he's quite a talented video editor. He does lots of social media editing. So you can watch those workshops on our community page. And then secondarily, Alec will be talking specifically about photography editing skills. So he focuses more on macro photography editing, and I focus more on specific tools in ACDSee and just teaching people how to use ACDSee. Now, the second part about this is, have any of you guys seen that we now have opened up a premium section on our workshops? if you haven't, it's on our community page. And one of the things that I should say is that we're still going to be doing all these free workshops. What we're actually doing is we're just adding more content at this point. We've been wanting to add more content, and we're doing that. So if you go to the premium section and you want to see more videos, more workshops on various contents with these 3 presenters, that's going to be where that is. And then in addition to that, if you sign up to that premium page, it also gives you access to Alec's photography courses that we've done previously. So those courses are like multi-video, short video segments teaching you various different tips and tricks in regards to photography. So it gives you access to those. And the whole thing is $7 US subscription per month. So that's my understanding. But yeah, so that's brand new. Check that out if you haven't. Actually, I'll just show you where it is. I don't know, mine might appear slightly different than yours, but I believe it is just located on the side panel, and there's it has the little black exclusive, the premium plan section here. So you can check that out. But it's all there for you. It's brand new. We just started it. We're just trying to gauge interest and see what people like. But this is additive content. This is not replacing the free workshops. We're just adding more stuff. So check it out. Okay, let's get started. I'm glad to hear that somebody's already subscribed to that. That's awesome. We are trying to develop some interest in that. Okay, so let's start. So how many of you are familiar with batching? And how many of you are familiar with develop mode? So, I just want to get a sort of a show of hands in regards to those 2 things. So John has some experience. It's great. Okay. Okay, excellent. So we have a fair amount of people that aren't familiar with that as well. Okay, excellent. Okay, perfect. So this is going to be additive information for certain people, and this is going to be brand new information for a lot of people, it looks like. Okay. So Tom asked for the premium plan. Do you have to pay an additional cost if you already have a subscription to ACDSee products? Again, Tom, this is just content. This has nothing to do with the products themselves. So this would be on top of whatever the subscription model it is. This is just content in relation to the services themselves. So. Okay, so if we go into, I'm going to go open to this image. Yeah, no problem. Thank you for the question. That's actually a good question. So if we're going to pull an image into develop mode here, and we're going to talk about this image and talk about the challenges with this image, and then we're going to sort of give a breakdown about how we can adjust lighting. So this is a good, this I think is a really good example. And the reason why is because there's a bit of depth to it, but overall it's actually kind of a flatter image. And we can really make this image pop in a big way. And one of the things that this image has already present is it has cues in regards to areas where the lighting is good. And in other words, there's cues in regards to where we can look at where we'd want to be additive with regards to light, and maybe where we want to overall sort of darken our image in certain respects. So develop mode's kind of interesting. Certain people might put an emphasis on fixing your image on a general perspective first, and then going through and adding spot adjustments. And I guess what I mean by that is adjusting general aspects would be applying to the whole image overall, and then focusing on light adjustments that reflect particular parts of our image, or highlights of our image, and sort of specific locations on the image itself. So I got to be honest, I come from a graphic design background. And so when I edit images, I focus on the particular components first, and then on the macro components last. And this might be antithetical to certain photography workflows, but I actually think when it comes to spot adjustments like these, this is a good way to go about this. And so we'll showcase why that is. So one of the things we want to do to this image is add light. And what we're going to do is we're going to add light that's going to draw our users' eyes towards specific elements, draw attention to specific elements of our image. And the ways that we can add light, I mean, most people are going to be familiar with adding light in ACDSee. It's going to be about adding exposure or subtracting exposure in certain parts of our image. And this is totally fine. And this is actually the one way we're going to apply this. So we're going to talk about the radial gradient, sorry, the linear gradient more when it comes to skies and sort of addressing some of the issues with like skies that are a bit more on the exposed side and have less detail. But right now, what we're going to do is we're going to go through the process of actually adding a focal point to our image. And we've talked about this in a previous workshop, but what we're going to do is we're going to use this radial gradient and we're going to apply a pocket of light to our image. And one of the things I want to maybe showcase first, I'm just going to hide that for a moment, is so a center point, right? Focusing on a specific element. And when you're adding light to an image, this really probably should be applied to the thirds line. So either right here, or right here. So one of the three sort of center points of your image. And it should be done maybe in an area that contains already pre-existing light or an area that you want to emphasize in some way. Because what we're going to be doing in this case is making this radial gradient slightly smaller. I'm going to tilt it on a little bit of an axis, and I'm going to go through the process of actually adding a bit of exposure to this area. Now, that being said, when I go to add exposure with the radial gradient tool, it actually affects the other parts of our image. So the opposite of what I actually want to have applied. But this is very easily fixable. We could just use this invert gradient function and go through the process of adjusting our radial gradient from there. So just to give just to reiterate what I've done there, I've opened up the radial gradient tool, which is this tool that's located under the tune panel. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to make a tonal adjustment to our image on a specific spot of the image. And this is within develop mode. Now, the other thing that's important to note, and this is something that I think is a bit confusing maybe to new users, as you know, UI and adoption of a new software can also be a bit of a slog sometimes. But in regards to these tools, so the brush tool, the linear gradient tool, and the radial gradient tool, they have their own set of adjustments that are separate, distinct from I suppose macro level adjustments or general adjustments, I guess is what we should be calling them. So these general adjustments apply to our whole image. For example, if we go into light EQ and pull down the midtones and maybe bring up the highlights in some way, that applies to our whole image non-selectively. Now, if we go to if we go down to this radial gradient tool, right? Or sorry, the radial gradient tool. This is going to be applied to a specific part of our image, which is indicated by the mask. So the mask is the red part of our image in this case, which is showcasing which part of our images are going to be affected. So the reason why we clicked on the invert gradient tool right here is because that indicates with this red mask which part of the image is going to be affected by these adjustments. So if I have it like this, the effect is going to be applied on the external element here. And if I switch it up, it's going to be applied on the center there. So, so this area here, this little box, this light gray box, these are the tools that pertain to the radial gradient. So these are the tools that are going to be adjustive in this area. And I think one of the common maybe misconceptions in regards to ACDSee is, oh, okay, I have my radial gradient set, awesome, and let's just go to change some exposure, and it is applied to the whole image universally rather than the actual mask itself. And that's because these tools are applied right here. So what we're going to do is we're just going to increase the exposure in this area, and you can see it brings up the exposure. We can actually play around with this a little bit. I might pop it a bit more, excuse me, like that. And one of the things to keep note of too is that when we go to add exposure in an area, if we have a really reduced feather, this is going to look quite egregious. Like look at look at how strong that adjustment is, right? But if we increase the feathering, the radial gradient itself is going to be applied in a funnily enough, it's going to be applied in a gradient. So gradient itself will then have a edge that is applied in a gradient from a maximum setting to a minimum setting. So what's occurring here is it's smoothing out the effect of the exposure adjustment to the edge of my feather. Okay, so Campbell asked, is there a way I can save the area such as a radial gradient set so that I can use it on other alterations to that area? Oh, as in the same image? So that's a really good question. Whether or not you can save a preset of just the, I don't think you can. However, what we can talk about, Campbell, is saving a preset of our gradients so that we can apply them to other images. In essence, what you're asking is, do I have to redraw this gradient? And the answer to that is, if I'm working on this image and I go to add a secondary gradient, yes. However, if we're working on a new image and I want to apply the effect of a gradient to another image, the answer is we can use our batching function, which we're going to be talking about later, to do that. So hopefully that answers your question. That's a good question, but I don't think there's a hack once you're in the image to copy that that radial gradient. So okay, so we are going to increase the exposure. Let's just maybe reduce the size of this this circle, this oval here, and let's just feel out how much light we want to add. I think the best way to do this is to start out with a bit more light and then tone it back if it's too much. So I think for me, this looks like where I'd want to set it at. So when we have a radial gradient set, we can actually have up to, 8 radial gradients in a single image. We don't need to go through and add 8 radial gradients to this image, not in this particular case. But one of the other things that we can do is we can go into the develop brush itself and also add 8 different develop brushes that maybe contain similar adjustments. So if I wanted to use this brush with a combination of exposure, I can now brush on different parts of my image and sort of affect them selectively in the same way I did with that radial gradient. But now this is putting an emphasis on parts of my image that I can draw on, if that makes any sense. A show of hands, how many people are already familiar with the brush, the linear gradient and the radial gradient? How many people have used the brush tool is actually maybe a better question. There's some really powerful settings within this tool. Okay, awesome. Some people have used them. So there's a couple different effects that are really relevant to the brush tool that maybe don't pertain to this workshop exactly. But those of you that have maybe not had an opportunity to use smart brushing within the brush tool, I would definitely play around with this. And just to give a brief sort of description of what smart brushing is this is maybe more relevant when we go to edit images where we want to adjust like color or something like that in one area, and we absolutely don't want to affect it in another. And so what would be a good example of this? Actually, I'll just do it right here because I think this is a fairly good example. So, and then we can go on to actually add exposure. If we look at this area right here, and we want to change the color of this green and not have an effect on other parts of my image, what I can do is I can brush on this area. I'll show my brush strokes. There we go. And with smart brushing turned on, what it's going to do is it's going to check for 2 things. It's going to check for pixels that have the same color or the same tonality as the places that we're actually selecting with our nib, with our cursor, right? And as I do that, what's going to happen is it's going to sort of search for those colors. And this is going to be super relevant in images where there's, dramatically different colors or contain, different types of those same blues. And you want to isolate a specific color blue or a specific tone, like a certain degree of darkness. And then once I've done that, and you'll notice that when I sort of go brush along the edge here, it's sort of being a bit aware and cognizant of specific parts of my the area that I'm brushing on. And then from there, what I can do is I can go through and I can adjust things like color EQ, and I can change the color of this, green to something else. So if I go into hue and I say, I actually want this to look more, I don't know, yellow maybe. Let's see how that looks. So you get an idea that I can change the hue in one particular place. And the difference between this and just brushing on normally, which is what we're going to be doing today, is there might be, let's do a quick example. So if I erase that and I just brush on non-discriminately without the magic turned on, there might be some areas that are captured in this that I actually don't want to have an effect on, parts of the grass or whatever, or other parts that are applied. Maybe less relevant in this case because we're predominantly looking at greens, so it seems to preserve that. But if we're engaging with other colors or something like that we're trying to avoid, or colors with a specific hue that's similar to it, then that may be something to avoid. Anyway, that gives you a good quick just example of the power of something like smart brushing. Smart brushing is used for selecting specific pixels and avoiding others, which is something that just brushing on its own will have an application for. Campbell asked, can you demonstrate pixel targeting, please? I certainly can. We'll do that after we just go through this exposure process. So in this case, we have added a little bit of light to the center of my image. And what we're going to do is we're going to turn on our mask for the brush strokes. And what we're going to do is we're just going to focus on areas of my image that already contain some degree of light. So I'm just going to brush on this area right here. And then as I do that, I'm going to read one of these questions here. So as suggested already by somebody else, the ability to copy paste a selected brush area or gradient would be a great enhancement and would avoid the task of making the same selection again. That's a really valid point. And what I would suggest to you is send me an email. And the reason why is because if you can send me an email, what ACDSee does is, because we're a small to medium sized company, we can actually implement feedback like that pretty quickly. And I think that's actually a pretty good idea. So I'm going to put my email in the chat there. And if you send me an email, what I can do is I can straight up forward that request to our developers and they can add it. And depending on how complicated the addition is, it might take several sort of versions of the product to be implemented. But if it's a fairly simple, edit that already, engages with pre-existing infrastructure, like in this case, presets, it might be something that we can add quite quickly. So just keep note of that. And right now I'll just add my email. So my email is aprice@ACDsystems. There we go. So what we have here is we have a variety of different selections focused on where the light is. And so if we turn off show brush strokes and we just increase exposure in those areas, oops, we don't want to be increasing hue. There we go. Pardon me. What we can do is we can go through and we can add a little bit of light in those areas. This is a bit egregious. What I might want to do is sort of lower that slightly, and then I might go in and just topically change a little bit of some parts of my image here, just so I'm not getting a effect that's too vibrant in those areas. Let me see. Vibrant's the wrong word. Bright is the correct word. There we go. Yeah, I might tone this down slightly. That was a bit much. And then have a look at this again. And so we've added a bit of light in those areas. And okay, so we have these light adjustments. And now let's talk about maybe making, one more light adjustment that's going to be contrary to the one that I just created, would be to do a darken effect right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just paint on this area right here of the sky portion. And I will tell you that in a second, Della. And just if you can pose any questions in Q&A panel, that makes it easier for me, everybody. Thank you. And I will get to that question. So I'm just going to lower the exposure in this area right up top here. And the reason why is because I don't want to emphasize it. I want it to be a bit darker. I just want to find a space in between. There we go. That's probably it. And so original image adjustments. And as we're getting through, we're going to fix the overall or general lighting now that we've made these sort of adjustments. So Della asked, how are you erasing? What did you change it back, please? Okay, so let's just give a quick example using a brand new brush. So I'm going to click on a new brush down at the bottom, and I'm going to add a ton of exposure, to this part right here. Everybody can see that. To erase, what you do is you can either right click on it, or you can use the reset function in regards to this specific brush stroke. So I don't think I think clearing all brush strokes will get rid of it, but what we can do is we can settings for active brush. Yeah, so I could turn that off by doing that. But if you right click, that is what actually gets the effect to be brushed off in this case. It's funny you mentioned that. I actually forget sometimes that that's a pretty preliminary sort of thing with ACDSee that I forget, that people don't know, which is always good that people remind me that. Yeah. So right clicking is kind of a fun and key element here. And actually, if we talk about right clicking in regards to adjustment sliders too, you'll see another thing, Della. Do you see how I have this adjustment set at 320? Well, if I actually right click on this individual slider, what it does is it actually resets it. So not only can you reset things by right clicking on the actual image itself, but you can right click on the slider to reset it to its original quantity, or quantity is actually the word I was looking for. Yeah. So just know that right click does have an effect in certain areas. And honestly, that's one of those things that you just discover over time. But it's a great question. So thank you for that. Okay, so general adjustments now, right? So we have our selective adjustments. We've focused on adding light to these particular parts of our image, or in the case of that corner there, just subtracting a bit. Let's go through and adjust the general settings. So we have our spot adjustments. And again, we can play around with these spot adjustments more if we see fit, but because they're parametric and non-destructive, I can always go back to them and edit them in the future. But now I just want to adjust the light EQ, because the light EQ is I need it to be a little bit darker in certain areas because we've emphasized the light. So maybe what I want to do is I want to pull down the shadows slightly. And maybe what I want to do is I want to, let's see what happens when I reduce the midtones. I think I like the midtones reduced a little bit. And what I might supplement that with actually is just a bit warmer temperature. And I think if we look at this, so now we kind of have this image here, the natural light that's located up at the top, that's sort of predicated on where light already exists in our image, has an implication to our image overall, right? So that light is now coming from a location, and it's far less flat than the original image. The difference between the flatness of the original image and the new adjustments is pretty significant. And what this is doing is it's actually creating texture might be the wrong word, but depth would be the correct word in our image. So we're adding depth to our image here. Yeah. So, and then Chris asked a really interesting, or not just a comment, but this is a good comment. Light EQ, so the tool by which we adjusted sort of the midtones and the shadows, actually does have 3 different settings, and these settings, I guess they're relevant for different images, and also different levels of skill as well. But if we looked at, if we just were to reset this group and then go to the second set of tools, which is standard, so in what this does, when basic, standard, and advanced, the difference between the 3 things is it adds more. You know what it does is it adds more sliders, actually. If we so in this case of basic, we have 3 sliders, right? We have shadows, we have midtones, and we have highlights. That's it. If we go to standard, what it does is it actually adds it sort of splits the 2 qualities into brightness and darkness, and then it exists. Then it also has 5 sliders within those. Shadows with, or not shadow might be the wrong word, but the darkest elements of the brightest parts of our image and the lightest parts of our image. And then inversely, we have the darkest parts of our images and the brightest parts of the darkest parts of our images. So it gives 5 sliders dependent on the actual, quantities of our image, or sorry, the dark and light parts of our image here. And so when we go to use these sliders, we can actually use the slider themselves, and it adds, in this case, what is this adding? This is adding light to areas of in our image that contain maybe moderate brightness, I guess would be the term. And then when we pull this up, you can see that light is added in those areas. And some of these might appear to have no effect because this area is pretty dark. There we go. So it looks like our major curve starts here, and that's where we can start applying light in this case. Inversely, we can make our image darker by doing the same in this area. One of the things you should notice about if you're using the standard tool is that if there's an area of our image here that engages with the red, if you start to see the red appear, this is a pretty key indicator that you're actually you're sort of overexposing your image. Or I guess with this, this would be in this case, or no, sorry, this would be underexposing our image, but this would be massively underexposing our image. This little indicator right here, this clipping bar, shows the parts of our image that are either that are very close or are true black. And what we want to do is we want to avoid true blacks in our image unless we're working in real subtlety with them, because the addition of too much true black to an image will essentially lose we'll lose any sense of our image. We'll just have too much black in our image, and we won't have variations of light. So whereas the red parts of our image, let's see if I don't think there's enough brights in our image to actually get an effect here. Let's see. Yeah, no, it's not going to happen. But so images that are quite bright, if you go in and add more brightness to those image, what you'll see in the brightness column here is that the red dots will appear instead of these green dots. So green indicates too dark and red indicates too light. So Robert said the red area in the histogram like diagram and the standard light EQ tool and moving side. Yeah, so when you adjust any lighting changes in this image, you can see that the histogram actually is adjusted by that. So yeah, your histogram is sort of like active in that case. But that's just sort of a commentary on light EQ here. Okay, so let's fix our image again. We lowered the midtones and we lowered the shadows slightly. And let's see if that's about what we had before. Okay, so that represents the selective adjustments and then talking about just quick general adjustments. And these quick general adjustments in this case were light EQ and white balance. So earlier, somebody asked about pixel targeting. So let's talk about pixel targeting briefly, which is a great foundational landscape adjustment tool. So to do this, I think what we're going to talk about is, what can we talk about? I think what we're going to do is we're going to make a new brush and we're going to change the green in this image to an orange color. And we can do that maybe using pixel targeting. Let's focus on that briefly. So I'm going to add a little brush. I'm going to turn on pixel targeting. So when you open up any of these selective tools, I think the linear gradient, the radial gradient have it, and it's in tune and detail. I don't think pixel targeting is in geometry and in repair. But if you open up tune or detail, I think that let's see. Oh no, it's actually just in tune mode. Okay, fair enough. So in tune mode, if we go to this little tool here, we can turn on pixel targeting. So pixel targeting allows us to, while using our selective adjustments, so our brush tool, our radial gradient tool, and our linear gradient tool, it allows us to focus on specific parts of our image while we're brushing, okay? And this is actually, in many ways, similar to maybe the effect of smart brushing, but instead of affecting the nib itself, it's affecting the colors that we can select, okay? So if I turn on color range, and the color range that I want to focus on is green. Let's see that. I want to see a, there we go. Let's see if this has any effect here. Oh, I see. Okay, there we go. I had to turn on brush strokes there for a sec. But if we focus on green, right, we can see that that when I make a brush, it's doing something that's very similar to that of the magic brushing, smart brushing, sorry. And it's just in those areas that have been selected in this case. So what it's doing is it's allowing you, the user, to make a selection. And then what it's going to do is it's going to allow you to refine the color that you're selecting in this case. So if I start pulling this into, let's see, if I start pulling this into the darker blues, yeah, there we go. So if I pull this into the blue section, which comprises the other parts of my image here, the parts that look like they appear in the background, that's what it's going to expand that brush selection. But when I hone it in or refine it, it starts to only focus on those greens that was selected within the brushing process. So, Campbell, is this making sense to you? Is this sort of describing what's happening here with the tool? I just want to sort of get a feel for your understanding here. Now, when we go to actually make an adjustment, like when we go to make a hue adjustment here, if we pull this green into the yellow area, you can see that that green in that specific area that we've used the pixel targeting tool to select, pardon me, is now being pulled into the yellows. And again, this is sort of another way of doing very refined selective processes. But anyway, so Campbell, if this answers your question, that's great. Sort of the intention here. I actually kind of do like the idea of selecting certain parts of my image and just subtly changing the color to just give another, like, you know, element of non-homogeneity to my image here. So if I just go through and I make a couple selective adjustments and just change the color green a couple areas, like, again, that gives it a little bit of more depth. What I might do is just slightly increase the smoothness and lower that slightly, just so it's not so intense. But that's a good way that you could go through the process of adjusting the hue in those areas as well. And that gives us more depth once again. So okay, so this is I guess the first adjustment. We're talking about using exposure. We're talking about using the brush tool. We're talking about using the radial gradient tool to bring light to specific parts of our image, and then going back and adjusting the general functions afterwards. And so what you might find is you want to adjust the general parts of your image first, and then go through and do the selective adjustments in develop mode. It actually matters not, and the reason why is because develop mode, the way it's been sort of designed, is to apply all these effects simultaneously. So if you get one benefit over the other, then do whatever you'd like to that image. Those effects are all being applied to your image simultaneously. There's not a scheduled order for those adjustments. So it doesn't matter if you start with selective adjustments. It doesn't matter if you start with general adjustments. Okay, so let's save this image, and we're going to talk now. Let's switch gears and start talking about the next component, and that is bad skies. And how to adjust sort of and deal with and give more sort of character to bad skies. But before I do that, let's answer some of these questions. So the first question that was asked was by T. Roberts. And what T. Roberts asked is, what does the red area indicate? And this is a good question. So, so this is a mask. Masking in ACDSee is essentially selecting an area that is going to be affected. Okay. Trying to think of a way to translate masking. When we mask a part of our image, we're suggesting that the areas that are contained with red here. Let's just go through and hopefully you see this area right here, T. Roberts, that is red. So what this indicates to us, the editor, is that the red area is going to be the area that is turned on for the sake of any adjustments that we make. So when I make adjustments, the red area indicates to me the area that those adjustments are going to take place. Does that make sense? I just want to clarify. So if that does make sense, let me know. Maybe in chat or something like that is a good way to do that. Anyway, we'll continue to move on. So that red area is indicated by, and just a note too to the anonymous attendee, people attend at different times, so they might not have caught that information. Awesome. Okay, so that masked area, that area that is represented up at the top here, is the one that's going to be, where the effect is going to be applied in our image here. So the way that we can sort of show or hide that is by clicking on this little icon here when we have a selective adjustment, applied. And this just enables me to see, the area that's going to be affected by the adjustment itself. And then when I hide it, it just showcases what those changes are going to be to me. So landscapes, skies that aren't, so this is when you have an image that has maybe more it's maybe slightly more exposed, or just an image where you want the sky to pop more and to see more detail in the clouds. What you're going to want to do is you're going to want to reduce the exposure. And that is in effect going to make that part of your image darker. But one of the things that we can do to offset this is we can explore using tone curves in addition to exposure to sort of make sure that that effect is not universally applied to that part of your image, and that it can have some sort of variation of effect with the brighter parts of the sky and the darker parts of your sky. And so the question is, well, what do you mean, Adam? Let's show you. So I have a mask applied. We're in the linear gradient tool, which makes sense if we're doing skies, because they're going to take up a half or portion of our image that we can use the linear gradient to affect. And then what we're going to do is we're going to reduce the exposure on our image. Now, when you reduce the exposure, one of the things you might want to be cognizant of, oops, there we go. Excuse me. You might want to be cognizant of is if you reduce the exposure on an image that has a really smooth sort of ombre in the background, so meaning that it goes from like blue to maybe another color like a purple, or if you have some sort of smooth transition in the skyline here, what you might see is a little bit of banding. And what banding is it's when it's when these little lines appear, these sort of band lines appear. And what I would recommend is to not exceed the exposure where the banding begins to appear. Let's see if I can get that effect. I don't think I can in this image, but we can explore this in other images. So I'm going to pull up pull down that exposure in that area. And then we're going to add the tone curve so that we can make a tone curve in this image that sort of gives me a little bit more light in those areas that are brighter, and a bit more darkness maybe in the areas that are darker, and give a smoother transition there than just that original brightness to that original darkness. Peter asked, Adam, would it be possible to supply copies of the images to the community hub before the webinar? I can start doing that, Peter, of course. Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good point. We'll do for the next workshop. Thank you for that. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to pull up and make this S curve. And I guess what I mean by S curve here is, thanks for that. That's a really good point. Is I want to make a smooth transition. So I'm taking that line that I have at the start, right? And I want to make a smoother transition. So I'm going to pull the darker parts down. As you can see, that's affecting just the dark parts of the clouds. And what I'm going to want to do is take another point and pull that up. And that's going to push a bit more light into the parts of my image, the lighter parts of my image. So giving me more variation in the clouds and really making me see, the clouds pop in this case. I might pull down exposure just slightly and have another look at my image now. So, this might actually represent more akin to what you had seen that day. Like this might sort of might apply an effect that actually is more true to what the eye saw when you were experiencing it at that day. So again, this is sort of a very simple two-step process that sort of looks to address either, like I said, you want to pull out those clouds. You want to make them pop. You want to give them, attitude in this case to our image to give us, again, a sense of depth and a sense of performance to this image. And all we did is we just slightly lowered exposure in this case to bring down the overall exposure of the sky itself, and then applied a tone curve. And the reason why we used a gradient to do this instead of going through and using the general tools is because we don't want to affect another part of my image that maybe is actually ideal or maybe needs different adjustments in this case. So does this sort of two-part effect make sense to everybody? And as I do so, I'm just going to check my notes here. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Dennis. Della, can you specify what you mean, just to be clear? So as I'm doing that, I'm gonna take a brief pause and we'll go on to the next tool in a sec here. But one of the things that I also like to mention too in regards to the workshops, we will be like alternating workshop content. So my next workshop that I'm going to be doing is going to be on the premium subscription plan, and then the next one I'll be doing after that will be on the sort of within the free content there. And so it's gonna sort of alternate in that case, and that's going to be the case actually for all of our presenters as well as Alec and Rodrigo. So let's see. Della said below bush center right. Below bush center right. Like right here, this area? And top of rock center to the bush. Yeah, so this area, like if you want to add exposure to that, let's do it with the brush. Very similar to the way that we did earlier. I would just paint on. Let's turn our brush strokes on and sort of just gently add a little bit of light in that area. And I mean really gentle with this area because there's not much difference. Oops. So I just pull that up and you can see that area a bit better now. And I would maybe really, really focus on having a high feathering for this. And the reason why is feathering is going to be your savior. Whenever you're making exposure adjustments, you want those to be very gradual. So I'd focus on having a high feathering. I'm not sure if this answers your question, Della, but yeah. Okay, so Clayton asked a great question, and we're going to answer that now. So Clayton asked a question. It says, if the tone curve affects light, okay, so what happens if you select one of colored traffic lights, for example? So what we're going to talk about now is we're going to add to this tactic, right? And what we're going to do is we're going to focus on maybe being more selective, and again using the brush to do the same thing, but omitting certain parts of our image. So this is a good example. This was a photo I took a couple years ago just in Toronto, and the sky is really bad in this image. I mean, this was just like a quick phone pic, So we're going to adjust the sky, but one of the things we're going to try to do is we're going to try to omit other parts of this image. So Clayton, in this case, this could be your traffic light. We're going to omit other parts of this image, like the architecture in the background. We don't really want this to be applied to our buildings. That would be not ideal. So again, the way we would do this is we could play around with the linear gradient and try to get a situation that captures the least parts of these buildings here, or we can go through and we can make a sort of accurate brush selection. I'm going to try doing this with smart brushing first, and we'll see how we do. We might actually want to add pixel targeting to this. We'll see. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to do my best to select. Yeah, this might require a very high tolerance. Let's see. I'm going to try to select as much of this as possible around the edges of these buildings. And this would be omitting your traffic light in this case. And then seeing if we can apply the same effect. Oops. The one thing I'm concerned about if these, well, actually this we'll see. I'm just worried that it might capture too much of the detail in this area. Well, we shall see. And I guess the reason why we don't need to, oops, we can just sort of focus on the areas around here is because we're just going to be pulling in a little bit of exposure. We're not going to be pulling in so much so that it would be egregious in this area. I actually might cover that. Let's see. So smart brushing again, well, the reason why it's not selecting these buildings is because they are both different in pixel, they're both different in color and tone. So as I go through and I sort of avoid these buildings, the reason why is because they have a different color and also a different degree of lightness to them. Let's turn this off. And then let's go through and let's focus. And to turn it off, I just switched the smart brushing from magic to off. And again, the purpose of this is to just now capture any parts of my sky that are missing in this case. And so we don't have to worry too much about the selection so much. So we'll just go through and we'll select the rest of our sky. Alternatively, what you could do is you can make a general adjustment to the sky. And then what you could do is you could make a brush selection adjustment to your traffic light, in this case, Clayton. So you could do the first part, which is adjust the whole sky, and then you could correct the adjustment of that one area. So make a sweeping adjustment first and then do a corrective adjustment. Let's see if we can make an exposure adjustment that doesn't, yeah, I need to like work on those edges there. That would be my main concern. Let's see here. Oops. Let's see, show brush strokes. And then I might have to apply some sort of feathering in this too. Let's see. Let's go out, zoom out a little bit. Oops. Focus on a very gentle adjustment. Okay. And let's add a curve after that. The only thing I don't like is how this appears. Oh no, that's just actually, I didn't realize that was just actually architecture in this case. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, so I would go through and I would just do the exact same thing, which is I'm going to, zoom out slightly. I need to make a general adjustment to this image afterwards to adjust the midtones. But all I've done here, again, is to pull down the exposure in this case, and I might find a healthy balance there, one that I can stand. And then I would just do that same tone curves. The difference in this case, though, in our image here, and we would still need to go through and make some selective adjustments to parts of our image here. But the difference is that if you can see here, this tone curve is still gradiated in the sense that it has this like slight S here. And what I'm doing is I'm focusing on where the light is in this image, which is on the far right here, or just whatever the main point where the chunk of your light is where this S goes. So this is going in this right-hand corner here. And then what I would do is, let's see if we can make some light EQ adjustments that take down the midtone slightly. I want to maybe bring down the highlights. And actually, let's see, I would pull up the shadows slightly in my image. I would do a slight temperature increase on this image as well. And I might, I mean, this is a cell phone image, so we can only edit it so much, but it gives you an idea from the beginning to the end how much I want to clean up the skyline on that guy for sure. But it gives you an idea from a standpoint of the clouds in this image, like how much of a severe difference that is in terms of how much power we can add into these clouds here. But we've only done this by utilizing the brush tool. So alternatively, if we were to just hide all of this adjustment, go into the gradient tool as well, we can sort of get a similar effect. It's just going to have an effect on the sort of the cityscape here when we go to adjust this gradient. So I'm going to go do the same thing. I'm going to pull down the gradient here. I'm going to find a location that I think fits, a bit of an angle, and then just apply a bit of a tone curve in the same way. And the difference here is it's going to have an effect, like I said, on the buildings in this case. So let's pull up until we can sort of find a standpoint we like here. Oops, that's too much. Might be right there. And then what I would also do is I would go in and add a second brush, and I would do the exact same brush function, slightly lower exposure. Oops. What's going on here? Oops. Oh, I see. That's right. Right. So we can reset this. The reason why I was doing that is because I had the prior brush settings on, and I might just go through and actually just focus on just the part of the city that in this case is omitted by that, and pull it down in exposure as well, and then maybe do a slight tone curve there until we have a setting we like. Too dark. There we go. So I need to spend more time with this. In this case, though, the indication here, the sort of the purpose of this is to look at this skyline exactly in this area and sort of see from the beginning to the end that there's like adjustments that one can make that sort of address this area. In this case, oops, I didn't mean to reset the brush one, but you see my point. Let's go on to, let's talk about one last one, and then let's make a preset. So this one is very simple. This is just going to be the exact same thing. It's going to be a linear gradient. We're going to apply it to the sky in my image here. We're going to lower the exposure slightly, and we're going to adjust a tone curve. And it's just going to give character to the sky. Oops. So just a slight lowered exposure, and that's all we've done. And this is just going to pull out a lot of these clouds that exist in this foreground here, give more depth here, and it also is really attractive in this section in the center here. And so if this is it, this is all you're doing, and you want to apply this effect to future images, one of the things we can do, right, is we can set a preset. And all that this image all that's being applied to this image is just the geometry adjustment. So let's go to save a preset, and this preset's going to contain just this adjustment. So if I go to save a preset, what saving a preset does is it allows you to play or to sort of add this development adjustment to other images. Now, because this is a selective adjustment, okay, and that selective adjustments are content aware in regards to the part of their image that's going to be affected, this is going to be something you're going to have to take into account when you're looking at your images. For example, if your skyline is 1/3, half, or 2/3, or whatever in your image, then you might want to only apply that adjustment to images that contain that degree. So 1/3, 2/3, or or halfway through your image. So just be mindful of it, and maybe we'll sort of say that in the description here. So in ACDSee, what we want to do is we want to select the tools that we've used if we're trying to omit other tools. So we can click select all in this particular case. And the reason why is because I have no other effects in development. If I had other effects, what I'd want to do is I'd want to go through and specifically check the boxes off where the effect has been applied. And in this case, we have a linear gradient. So let's go to our gradients. And let's see here. So we have selective adjustments, tuning brushes, tuning gradients. And that's what we have. We have a tune gradient. So what we can do is we can click on that box, and this is what's going to be saved. So when we enter a name for this preset, so we're going to call it, what is this? This is like 60% from the top. Let's say this is our 2/3. So 2/3 sky adjustment, and hit OK. And then what ACDSee is going to say is it's going to say that, hey, you've made that adjustment. So we can now discard this if we wanted to, because we can apply this effect to other images. And then when we're in develop mode, or sorry, in manage mode, what we can do is we can run this effect on future images. Let's see if I can find a landscape image that sort of roughly translates to that, which is about 2/3. Hey, let's try it on this image. This might work. I'm worried slightly that it's going to affect too much of the sky. The buildings in this, but this is a close example. So we're going to go to batch, and then what we're going to do is we're going to batch develop, and batch is what allows us to use those presets. So if I go to batch develop, and I find that what do we call it? Called it a tone adjustment. There's a sky adjustment here. Let's see here, 2/3 sky adjustment. So if I click on this 2/3 sky adjustment and develop it, we can see the effect of this development on our image here. And we can see that it's developed because there's a little develop icon that appears on the bottom left-hand side here. Let's actually see how it's affect our image. Let's see how well it's done. Well, the sky looks awesome. There's so much variation in color. Let's see the original. And actually, it hasn't really affected the buildings at all. So I'd say this is a pretty effective adjustment. So that just one simple batch adjustment has been applied to that part of our image. And what we can do is we can go up to our linear gradient, because now you can see that that tune adjustment has been added to the actual settings themselves in this image. So because we've added this preset, and because these modes are, have very actual numbers to them, like in regards to the gradient, tells me where that gradient is going to be applied. And then we can actually see where that gradient has an effect. So I can look at that, and I can see that the exposure is -60, and that's that exact tone curve in this image. And so you can see that that effect has been applied in that area. Looks great. Okay, let's answer some questions. Oh, and another thing I should maybe mention as well is just to reiterate how we open up the presets panel. So when you have adjustments you like the ones that we've added to this image, you just go to this master tool here. So this adjustment developer settings, and save a preset there. And so you go to that cogwheel and save presets. And that is what gives you this ability to open up this section here. Jean-Luc, thank you so much. Peter mentioned a really good point as well, that maybe some people, it wouldn't make a lot of sense to people unless they're starting out. When you, in Windows, if you hold down the Shift key, what it does is it affixes it to 45-degree angles. So when you're going through and you're sort of adjusting your image, you can use the Shift function to sort of adjust in 45 degrees angles. Without it, it's like, it's incremental. Does that make sense? Christoph, thank you so much. Take care. Alex, thank you. Rick, thank you so much. Okay, so let's answer some questions now. Barbara asked, can these presets in development be used in edit mode? No, not development presets. So we have a workshop coming up. Actually, I think it's one of the next workshops, and it's going to be in the premium section. But we're going to be talking specifically about actions. So actions are very powerful, and it's edit mode's way of doing batch developments. So develop mode has these presets, and those are batch applications that we can apply. So we can apply those batch presets, or we can just apply those presets in, in an image too. So if I go into this image specifically, Barbara, what I can do is I can apply a preset literally by clicking preset here. The batch preset element, the reason why it's really valuable is it allows me to click on multiple images at the same time and apply that batch development to multiple images. But that preset function is in develop mode in just those drop-down bars. So it's available right there. Now, edit mode has its own batch process. It's called actions. We don't have the time to talk about that today. It's different than presets. Barbara, does that answer your question? Hopefully it does. Yeah, so Radial is a good point as well, from Peter that he mentioned here. So if we go to, once again, if we go to the Radial tool, I think if we go to the side here, yeah. So it's going to holding shift is going to maintain that circularity to the radial gradient if you want to get a spot. And then if you let go, it'll allow you to do a variation there. So shift key is very important. Barbara, let me know if that answers your question. Awesome. Okay. Yeah, actions is something I do really want to spend more time on. Actions is so develop mode and edit mode are differently powerful. Develop mode is typically what photographer editors use to make sort of like we've been doing lighting adjustments on images, right? And edit mode is very specific. It's for making it can do lighting edits in the same way develop mode, maybe not as good. What it can do very powerfully is it's a multi image, like it allows you to add it's a layered editor. It allows you to add multiple layers, and it is the mode we talk about a lot in ACDSee, and I don't want to put too much emphasis on it today because today's about develop mode. So what are you changing when you alter tolerance? Okay, this is a good question as well. So let's go into an image that has a primary color. This is going to be a great example of this. Okay, tolerance. So tolerance when it comes to brushing. Okay, so we're going to turn smart brushing on again, and we have our tolerance set to maximum. Peter asked, what does tolerance mean? Tolerance is the degree to which smart brushing is discriminatory in regards to pixels. Okay, so when you turn tolerance to its maximum, ACDSee is being non-discriminatory would be the word. So it's being very non-exclusive when it goes to selecting colors. Peter, do you see how that's pretty soft? Watch what happens when I lower the tolerance. Let's see if I can lower it even more. When I lower my tolerance, because my nib is selecting a specific pixel, you can see that what it's doing is it's being more selective. So if I don't select a pixel that isn't exactly like the one that I used with my nib, then it's going to be omitted until I run my cursor over it. But this is not the case when I have high tolerance. When I have high tolerance, it smooths it out quite a bit. And the benefit here is you might need to lower your tolerance depending on how many variations in color there are, right? A lower tolerance might assist you in adjusting, where there's a lot of variation in color that you want to account for. Peter, does that answer your question? Hopefully it does. And then so when I go to make an adjustment to this, like a temperature adjustment or something like that, you can see that it's affected by those then adjustments. Okay, awesome. So tolerance affects the severity of your brush settings. Clayton asked, I'm sorry, I meant the red and green and blue dots on the tone curve tool control panel. Let's see if we can figure out what Clayton meant here. Tone curves, red, blue, and green. Oh, I think this is focusing on different, so in the top function, you have all colors accounted for. And then this focuses more on the reds, this on the blues, and then this on the greens in your image because it's an RGB model. So if I want to make a tone curve adjustment just to blue, I can do that. If I do a tone curve adjustment to the greens in my image, there probably isn't any. Let's see. Well, actually, there is a fair amount of greens. Let's see. Yeah, it's just because they're in the blues, though. That's no good. Or we can do the reds, and that might affect, it looks like it affects the clouds in this image. But in this case, what it can account for is you can either pull those down, so you can pull the reds down, you can pull them up, or you can apply some sort of curve variation to these specific colors. So if you account for your histogram, if you look at your histogram and say, okay, it looks like a lot of our reds are really dark and a lot of our blues are in the sort of mid saturations, then maybe that's the mid saturations are the ones that you want to have an effect on, in which case play around with the tone curves in its respective color. Clayton, does that make sense? Hopefully it does. And that makes sense what you meant by traffic lights. Anything that is white will RGB correct. White would be a white would be the 255, 255, 255 of all three variables. So I'm assuming that it would be not affected by tone curves, because to be affected by tone curves, you'd probably have to be existing in the very, very end here. Or maybe it would be, but it just wouldn't necessarily be affected by the ones that we've been talking about right now. So when we're looking at our tone curve panel, right, I guess what should be emphasized is these are the darks of blue. Let's change it there. These are the darks and these are the lights. And so it sort of matches in this way, the histogram. Yeah. 255. And then so if you adjust the white, so what are you going to be able to do? I guess you could pull down the white, right? And so you could pull it into lower areas of saturation, or you could pull up, in this case, the blacks or something like that. But because 255 is the maximum amount of brightness that a pixel can have, it likely wouldn't be affected by adjusting these midtones, these sort of middle sections. And the reason why is because it's already as bright as it gets. Whereas these middle saturations are the ones that are going to be affected by something like tone curves, because there's in this case, there's actually room to go up or down on those, on that scale. So 0 being black, 255 being white, middles being like, I don't know, 70, 80s, 90s, 120s, that sort of thing. Those are going to be affected more by your tone curve adjustments. Doc, does that answer your question? I don't know if it does. Oh, he said he got it. Okay, good. Sweet. Great. I'm going to put my email in once more. My email is aprice@acdsystems.com. Please email me if you have any questions in regards to this workshop. Maybe I'll remind everybody again, if you're interested in seeing more content, we're going to still be doing everything we've already done in terms of our workshops. But if you're interested in that, for $7 US a month, we have a subscription model that adds like, I think, it adds a bunch of courses that Alec Watson has already taught, and then you'll get more workshops a month than you would if you were just using the free model. So keep that in mind. Sign up for that. Hopefully you do. That would be awesome. And get more content. Thank you, Peter. So I guess what I'll do is I'll just reiterate finally what we covered today, and then we'll close off. We covered 3 things today. We covered making spot adjustments using exposure to add light to parts of our image to put emphasis on. We talked about the difference between general adjustments and spot adjustments when it comes to making foundational landscape changes. So start either with general adjustments and move to specific, or start with specific and move to general, like I do, however you like. We talked about using gradients, tone curves, and exposure to sort of apply those same spot adjustments, but looking at sort of macro parts of our image. And we put the emphasis on skylines because, like I said, I often get the question about how do I adjust this boring, sort of slightly overexposed sky that I have. And then finally, we just talked about very quickly, adding it as a preset. So you can take that adjustment that you've made and then you can apply it to other content in the future, new images. So, yeah. And yeah, it's nice to talk about develop mode. I talk about edit mode a lot. And the reason why I do is because I'm a graphic designer, and as a layered editor, it's like naturally home for me, but I do know develop mode, and it's nice to talk about it some more. So, is there any other questions that people have? Is there anything that you'd like answered? Please put it in the Q&A panel. I'd love to answer any questions before I sign off today. And just a note too, that if I don't have a chance to answer your specific question, we'll get to it at the very end. Or I can also look at answering these questions in an email as well. I'm happy to answer questions in an email. Yeah. Awesome. Thank you, Dennis. Appreciate that. Chris, thanks so much. Thank you, Ali. Thank you, Peter. Oh, thank you so much, Anonymous. I appreciate that. I'll fire that off to our developers. That'll be nice for them to have it, because I agree that's a good tool idea. So let me get that off to them, and I'll make sure to just let you know, send you an email back just saying that I've done that. So S. Maxwell asked, is there a way to change a portrait orientation to landscape orientation, cropping? So in develop mode, yes. Now I want to be very clear. Do you mean rotating your image though? So rotating your image would be different from cropping your image in terms of its orientation. So I just want to be very clear. Do you mean to rotate your image, or do you want to cropping your image into a different orientation? If I can just get a follow-up on that, Maxwell, that'd be awesome. Thank you, Bud. Thank you, Suzanne. Thank you, Richard. Awesome. I love a picture, but I want it to fit the frame in a landscape format. So okay, so you like the photo, great, which means it doesn't need to be rotated. Okay, so, and then you want to fit it into a landscape format. Okay, so let's open up develop mode and we'll talk about geometry. So geometry is the area. Okay, thanks, Trevor. I don't know how you did either. You might be able to rename yourself just in future workshops by clicking on the little ellipses dot on the right next to your section there. Also, I think when you go to sign up for the workshop, maybe you have the opportunity to change your name. Either way, take care, Trevor. Okay, so in crop function, Maxwell, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to go to crop naturally. And so if you have this orientation, right, and you want to make it into a different orientation, let's see if I can change that. So all I did here is I clicked on this little icon right here. So this is rotating the cropping area. So naturally, when you go to crop an image, it's going to reduce the amount of area that you can actually entertain. But if I click on this little icon here, it's going to give me the ability to sort of change the orientation. So if your orientation is like this, Maxwell, right? What you want to do is you're like, okay, I like this image. I love the fact that it's a landscape image. However, I do want a portrait image. Click on this little icon within geometry here, and it's going to switch it over to a quote unquote a portrait mode. Now, within that portrait mode, it does give you the ability to change that. You can also, it looks like you can see, is there a way to just adjust this on its own? Oh yeah, you can also click on constrain proportion, which is up at the top here. And what this does is it automatically sets it to a specific modality. So in this case, the modality is landscape. But if I click on contain proportion, what I should be able to do is give me the ability to set it automatically myself. Does that answer your question? Yeah, so it doesn't look like you need to mess with height and width, although that's fair. Just either use constrain proportion and the rotate function, or set it yourself using just that. But shouldn't need to play around with the width too much and the height, because that'll change the orientation of the sort of the overall bounding box, which you don't need to change. That's a great question. Also, I think if you were to do that, I think if you just click on maximize crop area, it'll reset it. So yeah, no problem. That's a good question. Okay, is there any other questions before I sign off, folks? And again, just my email is aprice@acdsystems.com. Happy to answer any other questions before I sign off today. How did you switch to portrait? All I did, Doc, so I go into crop and I click on this little icon that says rotate the cropping area. Oops. So I would make a crop, sorry, and then I would rotate the cropping area. Does that make sense? Okay, awesome. Glad it makes sense. So yeah, thanks everybody. I think I'm going to sign off. I might leave the chat open for maybe 5 minutes or so just so people can sound off if they have any questions, but I'm going to mute my mic so I can rest my voice, as it were. And I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much for participating in our workshop. Don't forget about our premium workshop place, premium community. If you're interested in more content for $7 a month, it's there for you. And if not, just continue to enjoy these free workshops. They're going to still do them for you. The premium content is additive. It is not replacing anything. So thanks again, folks.